Hello, everybody. This talk is going to be in two parts. I'll start with something very intimate, and then I'll proceed into the actual talk. Some speakers like to make you stand, move, or breathe, or do some other kind of exercise to set you up in an energized mood for their talks. I instead would like to invite you into a very vulnerable space and read you a love letter to the future. I leave it for you to decide if this letter is to someone, or maybe it is to you. Sitting here at the very front because you want to hear every word of this talk, or in the corner because you're feeling shy, or at the back, maybe because things got in the way and you ran late. Either way, I'm so grateful for you giving me this most precious of all resources, your time, to hear me speak about the future not just as it has been, but as it could be. Your attention to entertain my future dreams, like maybe at least some of it could be yours too. So many people think of me as this optimistic, inspirational, almost superhuman kind of character. But I want to be honest with you. The very reason I end up working on the kind of futurism that inspires hope is because throughout my life, I have experienced periods when my mind would temporarily cloud and descend into an abyss of unbearable emptiness and despair. My own futurelessness, you could say. To imagine that things could be different than they are has never been a fanciful intellectual exercise for me, but a survival strategy. There were stretches where this is what has literally kept me alive. If I can feel that my words give you hope, it helps me to maintain my hope too. And the hopes you share with me, your future dreams, replenish mine too. Besides that, a resignation to just live in the world as it is has never seemed a viable option for me, because the world as it is not a very welcoming place for people like me or accepting of life like ours. The truth is that it's through shared trauma that we get to know each other in the deepest, most visceral, most lasting of ways. And so for me too, everything I have to say about the future today has been filtered through this lens of complex, often painful experience, not just my experience, our shared experience, our shared pain too, not just our shared pleasure. Everything that has happened so far, heavy some of it as has been, I'm convinced none of it was in vain. And it all has somehow ended up in me stepping on a stage to share what I have to share. And all I can dream of right now is that it helps you see that the status quo is not all that there is, let alone not all that can be. If I can inspire thousands of strangers, can I hope to inspire you too? I keep thinking about that time when you spoke to me of your anxiety, that all these challenges I say I'm strong enough for could stifle me spiritually or professionally. Dim my fire, you said. That it'd be better for me to choose an easier path, a fast escape route. But nothing could be further from the truth. I'm cursed, but also blessed to have this outlet of my practice, the gift of being able to pour into it whatever wonder and horror that life brings me, transmuting even some of these roughest patches into something beautiful and hopefully meaningful that ends up positively changing lives, or at the very least affecting many life trajectories. Every day, I give thanks for this privilege to speak my own voice and have it resonate with so many. Could my reading out loud this letter reach something in your heart that maybe when I speak to you off stage it doesn't always do? Sometimes it feels like you read my words, but don't fully trust that they are really for you, or that I actually believe what I say. But they are, and I do. I believe in you, and I believe in what we're capable of together. I also know that for the sake of our very chances for life, we cannot give in to predetermined future, or it is going to kill us. We do not have the luxury of time to waste. We have to jointly work towards the possibility of a different reality, urgently. A possibility of healing so we can be the fullest versions of ourselves. Can you close your eyes and begin to imagine what it would really be, us being us, and deserving this joy and happiness, not despite it, but for it, and actually getting to not just savor it furtively as if in fear for being caught, judged, and punished, but actually live it. Keep dreaming a happy future. Keep sharing these dreams with each other and with the entire world. I believe in us making this future that is ours, Ours, truly, celebrating joy against all odds. Remember what we spoke about radical tenderness? This is it. This is what it is about. To allow ourselves to deeply care, even knowing that there will inevitably be pain or even loss sooner or later along the way. Radical tenderness is not about fighting or dying for a cause. I repeat, radical tenderness is not about fighting or dying for a cause or even for each other, but finding hope no matter what, no matter how, to continue living and to continue choosing growth rather than temporary, illusionary comforts. We are people that do not have the luxury to shove things under the rug and delude ourselves it will just magically resolve itself. Now onwards, even as we feel fear, we will not allow ourselves to be consumed by it. We will continue loving life on this planet and our intertwined existence as deeply and authentically as mortal humans can. Everything else is details. Remember, I'm a futurist. I know if we actually try, we can figure them out. If we have a vision with patience and determination, we can bend the fabric of reality towards it. Or at least we would know we have not abdicated. We have tried. So in the real part of my talk, I want to speak to you how Protopia can be an antidote to futures of fear. Because fear is dominating our information landscape today. AI got even booed at South by Southwest, the techno solution and has gathering par excellence. We have all these fears, and these fears are becoming immobilizing, and they are becoming weaponized to alienate and isolate us further. And so we need to find ways to counter that. And of course, stories of the future is how we counter those fears. But we've been suffering from a bit of a crisis of imagination. The two ways to speak about the future that have dominated both entertainment and the real futures and foresight practice is dystopia and utopia. And they've been positioned as these polar opposites, as answers to each other. But are they really? To start with, dystopia, the vision of doom and gloom, positioned to us as some kind of cautionary tale. But is it really anymore? Or just a regurgitation of something that leads to our disengagement, to inaction, and to normalization, that somehow all these dystopian futures could come to be, and yet we could still survive? The latest season of Black Mirror had the least cultural impact ever, because in a way, we get it. Now we actually get it. But there's something even worse that dystopianism does. It gives great ideas to some terrible people. Dystopia becoming a product roadmap, because there will always be ones who will not just want to make money while the world burns, but maybe make money by setting the world on fire, if that benefits them. So, utopianism gets positioned as the answer to it. But what has been the legacy and the history of utopianism? If we actually look at its roots, it has always been exclusionary and eugenic by default. In some way, if disabled people still exist, is it even utopia? And if utopia requires to eliminate anything that doesn't fit that narrow monoculture, and generally those tend to be disabled people, neurodivergent people, queer people, ethnic minorities, whose cultural understanding of what civilization should be about doesn't fit our narrative? Is this something that we should still consider as an aspirational answer? And in fact, if we scratch just a little bit beneath the surface of any historical utopia, from Manifest Destiny, the colonization of Americas that required the largest genocide in human history, or the Nazi expansion of their Lebensraum that only required targeting classically first the disabled people, queer people, and then Jewish people, Roma people, Slavic people, etc., etc., etc. How is that justifiable? Or something that now is becoming popular with a lot of young people that actually have not a lived experience of it. The communist utopia. Well, I was born in it. I was born in a country that doesn't exist anymore, the Soviet Union. And within my own family legacy, and of course, in every story that I heard from the time I was a little child, I knew what was the toll that the Soviet utopian dream took on the land, on the indigenous cultures, and of course on anybody that didn't conform the productive unit of communist fever dream. So, in truth, every historical utopia has been somebody else's dystopia. And so we need to think from whose perspectives those fantasized futures past have been told. What I want to invite you to think is how those who control the fantasy ultimately end up controlling the future. Because it all starts with a vision. And there's a reason why there's this persistency of only certain kind of visions in our future's landscapes. It is not accidental. It is very hard for people in power to imagine a future where not only they as themselves, as the individuals, are obsolete, but their very understanding of the world becomes obsolete. And so that's what we are pushing against. And that's what we need to keep pushing against. And that's why it's never been more urgent than ever to reimagine what a different future could be. Because otherwise, we end up looping back into the old religious dogma, just now transformed with a technological twist. So, an example of that is TESCREAL. It's this new emergent bundle of ideologies and a scatological tech theology. I call it nerd rapture. And it's just a new version of the religious impetus to control the future and to tell you how everything that is related to our bodies, to this planet, to the soil that gives life, is in fact something filthy, something temporary, something that needs to be transcended. So TESCREAL consists, it's a term coined by Timnit Gebru and Emil P. Torres, and it consists of transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. And of course, many people will argue what these ideologies stand about, and how maybe not all of them should be put in the same bucket. But the truth is that fundamentally, they perpetuate that Christian ascensionism that again considers everything that would be associated with our bodies, with this earth, and especially with the notions of disability, queerness, indigeneity, as something that absolutely needs to be transcended through the engineered technological means. And it projects these visions of gods and demons away from the figures of insert the name of a god onto AI. But nothing really could be further from the truth. These are all just imaginary fictions, be they religious fictions and their desires for control and their desires to direct our energy towards these particular things, or again, the very old school religious prejudice. They are really not that different. None of these are based on the most bleeding edge empirical scientific understanding of the world. And of course, it ignores the indigenous understanding of the world. And it projects, instead of religious fantasy, in this case, a sci-fi fantasy onto the future. The truth is that tech solutionism that doesn't address foundational issues always equals oppressive future. Technology can never be this magical panacea. If the problem is social, cultural, political, the solution needs to be too. Technology is just an extension of our biology, of our minds, and we embed all of our biases within it, in how we design it, in how we deploy it, in who gets to use it, and how we can abuse it. So what do? I hope I scared you enough and put you enough on the edge of your seats. First, we push back both on nostalgia and also on techno-fetishism. These fictional ideas of ideal past, we need to really look at it straight in the eye, not just from the perspectives of the most privileged within any given context, but whose dystopia it was built upon. And similarly, we need to put on the same critical lens on these technologically solutionist dreams that tell us that VR somehow is going to be this empathy machine that's going to make us all empathetic, and rather see how it is maybe one of the most advanced mind manipulation mediums that indeed could be used for good, but also will most definitely be used for bad. So, Bell Hooks says, to be truly visionary, we have to root our imagination in our concrete reality, while simultaneously imagining possibilities beyond that reality. What does she mean by that? We have to have historical literacy. We have to have literacy of the present moment. We have to understand what is that is shaping our future. That is the only way to not succumb into this increasingly precipitous disinformation wormhole that now will be AI automated. But at the same time, we can't just be extrapolating again and again from a status quo. We need to imagine how all of this understanding of how things have been and all of these patterns could allow us to break them for hopefully something more inclusive. And so I say that informed hope is always better than techno-billionaire optimism. Mark Andreessen, a few months ago, published Techno-Optimist Manifesto, where he basically says that whoever that is a tech critic is against civilizational betterment. That is a lie. We must be as critical as we can. And that is not being negative. In fact, to believe that we can do things better, that things are not predetermined, that we have a choice, that is the most positive thing that you can do. But you cannot stop with what are you saying no to. To understand these historical patterns, to identify what are you saying no to, has always has to be a precursor to what are we saying yes to, enthusiastically, joyfully, excitedly saying yes to. What are these shared yes visions of the future? And how informed hope is not wishful thinking, not magical leapfrogging, but actually knowing that something is worth living for and doing it. So, my positive equation for protopian futures is evolved values plus innovative tools. In fact, innovative tools that emerge from these evolved values is what could hopefully lead us towards livable, aka Protopian future. Not perfect, not some kind of magical state, but something that would need to be continuously iterated, adjusted, and nourished and maintained. So these are the principles upon which myself and Protopia Futures Collective imagine what that future could be, not just built and engineered, but grown around. The first one is plurality, beyond the binaries. Tolerance truly is not enough anymore. We need to become curious of each other specifically for that difference and how our difference in our dystopia background, ethnic background, generational background, cultural background could help us approach these global problems that we face better and more completely. How do we come together specifically for that curiosity of each other's difference, not despite it? And also, how do we recognize that there's so much space in between? That so few of us are really within this narrow idea of a particular racial or gender or disability ability category, and rather move in those spaces in between, and how that is actually a really, really fertile place to explore. Next one, interdependence beyond borders. Pandemic has showed us how truly interconnected we are, and that you cannot put borders neither to virus nor to disinformation campaigns. Even the originators of certain disinformation campaigns, such as, for example, Russian government with their RT English channel and how much anti-vax stuff they pushed on it. And then within RT Russian channel, they were pushing, oh no, vaccine's actually great, you gotta go get vaccinated. But then the very Russian public started watching RT English, and they're like, well, no, but you were telling everybody else that vaccines are dangerous, so why are you pushing it on us now? So there's a way how these things come biting the ass of those even promoting it. So we live in this interconnected world, and that is actually not our weakness. This is something that comes from disability justice community. Interdependence rather than independence being the most aspirational goal. The truth is, especially when it comes to disability and even neurodivergence, most of us, unless we die a sudden death, will experience it at a certain moment of our lives or other. And so it's better to prepare ourselves for it and to create a more inclusive world, so that when we find ourselves in that situation, we would not be dealing with all of the adversity and all of the stigma. And so we have to think how the future should not be about these magical superhero figures, aka all of our Marvel storylines, coming in and saving the day. And then we're surprised why so many people believe when somebody like Donald Trump stands up on a podium and says, only I can save America. Well, that ground of belief and understanding has been rendered fertile with fictions. And so maybe we need more fictions where the hero is a community coming together beyond the borders, beyond the binaries. Okay, next one, celebration of embodiment, joy, pleasure. Not as something superficial, but truly something that makes life worth living. What does it mean to be in this body and to experience this world? Again, let's not succumb to ableist ideas of stronger, fitter, faster. But actually, what does it mean to touch the living world, to smell it, to taste it fully? And the reality that we're living in right now is actually human sensory devolution, because we're becoming so removed from the full capacity of our experiencing body, from each other, So many people in the world are experiencing skin hunger, going for weeks, months on end without having any physical contact, beyond just the pandemic. We're eating limited amount of foods. We are engaging in limited range of motion. We are smelling limited amount of scents, most of them artificial. And that is reducing our capacity to be connected with this planet and with each other and with our own bodies. And literally rendering us sick. So how we can think of technologies that are not trying to replace or replicate or create simulacras of the world, but help us come into the world more closely and to each other and to our own bodies. So let's think about that. Okay, next one, biosphere regeneration. Sustainability is not enough. So much damage has been done. We need to repair. And I think the only way to do that is really starting to see life as the most perfect technology. Because life doesn't look at anything as resources and then eject it as waste. It is in this continuous process of circularity, regenerating itself. And growth is not about becoming bigger and bigger, but about the processes of regeneration. So we need to think about that too. Next one, creative flourishment and spiritual fulfillment. Not just children need to play. We all have this creative need to express ourselves and also to be in awe and wonder of other people's expression. And whenever we stifle that impulse, and whenever we start stifling that within our culture, it gives a fertile ground to fascism. Similarly, spiritual fulfillment. This is something that rarely gets included in most of the future conversations. But the truth is, when we create a spiritual vacuum, especially for people that have grown up within the context of fundamentalist religions, that gets transformed into new forms of religious conspiracism or QAnon cults or other forms, again, of ultimately fascist ideologies. So what is that spirituality of the future that doesn't create in-groups and out-groups and damn whoever doesn't conform to it to eternal hell, but actually allows us to come together, not against our differences, but for them? And so last one is evolved values, and that really is what underlies it all. If we want to imagine a world that is different, unless we succeed in moving what we consider valuable, what we consider beautiful, what we consider aspirational, what we consider ugly, we're not really going to change things. There's so much fighting in this world today. And we get this idea that because it's so documented and so in our faces and so weaponized, that things have never been this bad. This is the worst tragedy. This is the most dehumanizing kind of thing that is happening right now. There's no hope for peace. There's no... even thinking about peace is this ludicrous thing. It's a utopian thing. But the truth is that every time that peace was made, it was made after a conflict. And human history is a history of atrocity, but also wonder and grace and beauty. All of these things have always coexisted, and whatever that is happening today has a lineage, not just decades into the past, but millennia. And so, my friend and collaborator, Jenka Grofinkel, suggested maybe peace is the most protopian thing that there is. Because peace is not just about laying down arms. It's about something that needs to continuously be worked upon. Peace isn't some final destination utopia. Peace is work. Peace is cultivation. Peace is stewardship. Peace is negotiation. It is tedious and it is laborious. It is not some silly, unsophisticated, privileged fantasy. So how do we talk about future peace? And not give in to people that say that this just cannot happen, because it actually has to happen, and because it has, and we actually are capable of it. We're in this together, but we're not in the same boat. Some people have yachts. Some barely have life jackets. And in this boat is not just us humans. It is all life. So, when we have to make choices about being inclusive, can we include everybody? And who do we have to center when we really come to these most difficult decisions? And it's the leadership of the most impacted that will benefit all of us. Whenever we're dealing with any particular issue, we have to understand who is at that bleeding edge of harm, who will be most severely impacted, and not design for them. Not perpetuate the same kind of ivory tower stuff that most of historical utopianism has been designed around, but really design with, and whenever possible, really center the leadership of the most impacted. If we're talking about pandemic-related solutions, let's not talk about the youngest, quote-unquote, healthiest people. Let's talk about people that are the most immunocompromised. If we talk about any kind of environmental action, let's center the voices of people that live closest to the land in the areas that are experiencing the harshest climate impact. So on, so forth. Leadership of the most impacted is not some kind of charity thing that we're doing because we're so kind and graceful and generous. It is something that will benefit us. Because whatever tragedies that we think are not ours, that are far away from us, will come haunt us sooner or later in the future to come. I think so much of what stands in the way of it is how we have mechanomorphized life and yet anthropomorphized AI, aliens, and gods. Fanciful words. Essentially what I mean by this, that we have dehumanized, we have disregarded the intelligence, the consciousness that surrounds us, that we swim in. And we have projected this human lens onto fictions that are purely theoretical and not reality. Surely alien life exists somewhere, but I don't think any of us are likely to meet aliens in this lifetime. AI consciousness, theoretically possible, but not really, because to the best of the bleeding edge understanding of neuroscience, embodied cognition, etc., consciousness arises from this complex ecosystem that life is, and not just human life. Not just the mathematical calculations that could be reduced to algorithmic processes within the gray matter of our skull, but really our entire nervous system that interacts with our microbiome, of which there are about 40 trillion cells against about 30 trillion cells that is actually ours. 90% of DNA versus 10% of DNA that is ours. Okay, 10% body mass, but you get it. None of us are individual islands. We are ecosystems in continuous exchange with each other as members of our species, but also with all life. And we can only be well if all of that life is well. So maybe, just maybe, it is time to become curious of all life and start seeing the intelligence of the trees, of the oceans, of the octopi, and all of the less charismatic species too, because we are interdependent. And start fantasizing less about things that are just pure fantasy. And it is urgent, because with every language, with every creature that vanishes, we lose a way of making sense of the world. These are the words of Ed Yong from his brilliant, brilliant book, Immense World. And it's true. The loss of every species and every language is not just the loss of this species or that language. It's a loss of an alternative way of experiencing, of knowing reality. And so just preserving the DNA or making pictures or capturing in volumetric VR that particular species will never be enough. It'll just be a dead fossil. A whole understanding of the world lost to us. Even to this day, people love to use this quote by Buckminster Fuller about spaceship Earth and we are all passengers on it and we all crew on it. But Earth is not a spaceship. It is not an engineered entity. And we are not on it. We are off it. Again, more of the DNA within our body that we have is not even ours. We can only be well if all of the life that we engage with is well. And Earth is a complex ecosystem. And everything, all that we are, is inextricably linked with it. None of us exist as an individual. We keep affecting each other. We truly live in an immense world. But here on Earth, this is not a call to stop all space exploration. This is just a call to maybe redirect our attention. Because right now we have mapped better the outer space than our very oceans, without which we cannot survive. The emergent political choice is not anymore between left and right, conservative, progressive. These ideologies have become ossified and started eating away at each other. Maybe the emergent binary is really extractive versus regenerative politics. And the emergent division of future scenarios is really between Eremocene and Symbiocene. Again, fanciful words, so I'll explain. Eremocene is the post-Anthropocene, the age where we extinguished so many other species, that not only it leads to our existential loneliness, but ultimately our extinction too. And Symbiocene is the age where we actually finally learn how to symbiotically coexist with all of the other life, human and other than human. And maybe it's helpful to think about this political binary even when we communicate our political preferences and future political campaigns. Because there's less of a hang-up. Today, people will ascribe themselves to a left or right camp just because there's a legacy to these words. And it becomes harder to explain how things that applied in the past maybe don't really apply in the future. Whereas if you ask, would you like to live in an extractive future? Lift your hands. How many of you would like that? Nobody? And how many of you would like to live in a regenerative future? Lift your hands. Quite a few more hands. And I'm sure, even in many different social and political circles, we'd still see a similar kind of preference. So, I would like to invite you to defy these narratives of rapture, aka escapism. Be it religious or technological, it's all just forms of rapture and escapism of what actually we have on our plate to deal with. And maybe, just maybe, we can move tenderly, stop breaking things, people, planet. Leave that user-centric design behind. but also leave the human and humanity-centered behind and start embracing life-centric design. Not because we think humans are the virus or because we aim for a post-human world, but actually that for the long-term human thriving, we just maybe need to decenter ourselves so that we can actually be better long-term. And what if the future could actually be everything that we hope for, but not what we've expected? Maybe it's not the flying cars that are missing in the future. Maybe it's rewilding our cities and making space in our urban skies for wild species of birds. Maybe the future can be all these things that we hope for, but it just won't be what we expect. We are here on earth together, so very temporary, yet all we do today will echo forward. Each of us has an impact, personally, professionally. Some of you have 3 followers, maybe your sister, brother, children, parents. Some of us have hundreds or thousands or millions of followers and people whose lives we can affect. Followers is the wrong word, but you get what I'm saying. With everything that we do, personally, professionally, and even in our everyday interactions, we are shaping the possibilities of the future that will then continue being shaped onwards. And so I want you to invite to think what all of us can do. And yes, individual choices won't be enough. But many of us also work in the realm of structural choices, and all of that combines. And so what can we do with this limited time that we have? Because future is shaped not just by our actions, but also by our apathy. Whatever that we disengage with has an impact too. Whenever we resign to the status quo, to predetermined reality and say that this is the only way that things can be done because that's the only way that things have been done, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We cannot give up. That's just not an option. Thank you so much. This is dedicated to 2 people in my life.